Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I talk with Jakob Casella. Jakob holds a bachelor degree in coaching from the Australian College of Applied Psychology, where he is now an academic educator and is an accredited coach with the International Federation Coaching. He has worked in a range of contexts, including schools, workplace, and in private practice. Jakob combines his qualifications, experience, and intuitive gifts to support, nurture, and encourage his clients to undertake real, long-lasting change. In this week's episode, expect to learn what depression means to Jake and how he manages it with his clients, triggers, how the body never lies, how to process your triggers, why your triggers are your greatest teacher, and much, much more. Enjoy the episode. Now, guys, before we start this week's episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about the Life by Design Mastermind. The Life by Design Mastermind is the mastermind for go-getters and high achievers who are looking to create a more successful, fulfilling, and balanced life by design. If you're serious about transforming your life, achieving your goals, and living a life on your terms, then the Life by Design is your golden ticket. Head over to the show notes and click on the link for more details about the program. Jake Casella, welcome to the podcast.
Hey Blake, nice to be here, mate.
Mate, you look fresh. You normally, when I see videos of you, the hair's up, it's flying everywhere. I love the long locks, but you've tied them in for the podcast.
Yeah, mate. Feeling fresh today, feeling good. Got the cap on.
Perfect. Mate, lots for us to talk about. Your new book has been out recently, which is very cool. I reckon I saw a study somewhere that triggered was one of the top 10 words of 2021 or something like that. So I'm interested in what's become so talked of, but we'll see how we go getting down that line. Can you give the guys a 60 or 90 second spiel of who you are and what has got you to where you are today?
I'll give it my best shot. Yeah, so I'm Jake Casella. I'm a therapist and a coach. And I think for all people that work in this industry, I'm no different. It's always life that forces you into this place. And working through my own depression, kind of from age 10 to age 20, and just struggling with my own mental health stuff is what really brought me into this space of self-help. Self-help is really like self-help and running is really like what helped me to move through, and actually mindfulness is what helped me to move through my depression and really start to create a more healthy relationship with inside my mind. And that was kind of, through my kind of teens and early 20s. And that really got me onto this road of, I go down the road of kind of sales, or I end up helping people and using the same kind of skills as people skills, but to help people. And that's the road that I ended up down. And I haven't looked back. I love what it is that I do. I did some university study and then went and did some other outside training in some specific modalities, some specific types of therapy and coaching. And that kind of like got me to a point where I was like, all right, now I've got to work with humans and really build up the reps and the learning that you don't get from the books in uni. And that led me to community work, mental health, social work, and homelessness work. And so that's kind of what I did when I was based in Sydney, and I started my business on the side doing one-on-one coaching and therapy. Usually I started with naughty young boys, which I was a naughty young boy. So I started there and helped them, and then gradually started moving towards adults, and then started moving out of all that community and social work stuff. So these days it's one-on-one coaching and therapy, and I'm a university educator. So I'm teaching the kind of up-and-coming counselors, therapists, coaches, some of the first few modules in their university studies. So that's me.
How do you navigate the mainstream schools of thought around depression and mental health with the alternative schools of thought around mental health and depression?
Yeah, this is big, actually. One of the university modules I teach is mental health. Mental health and wellness actually has been renamed. And we do talk a lot about this, right? That the traditional way of looking at it, other ways of looking at it. Simply for me, what was on offer didn't work for me. Like the talk therapy and certain techniques around just like bring awareness to your, unconscious, unhelpful things and they'll change. That didn't really work very well for me. And like talking about my stuff didn't really change it for me. So the proof there was that it didn't work. And that's where I started rejecting, I guess, that way of looking at things pretty early on and started looking for alternate approaches. And that's kind of what led me into like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, that was really helpful. Again, it still didn't really solve the problem, and it kept going for me, where I got interested in trauma and the subconscious mind, and really how to work on things at their root. That's where stuff really started to change for me personally. And yeah, it just grew my understanding about mental health and about the human psyche. But simply the way that I see it nowadays is that so there's symptoms, and and symptoms are a cluster of symptoms that will form a diagnosis. So for example, people can say I'm feeling depressed, but that's different to being diagnosed with clinical depression. There are, basically a whole range of symptoms, and when all those criteria are met, then someone can be given a diagnosis. Sometimes it's very helpful for people to have a diagnosis. Sometimes it's very limiting for them to have a diagnosis. And yeah, I see why they're important. I also see how they can be limiting. But really, the easiest way for me to look at this, and I think for anyone to look at it, is that anything that's going on that's kind of causing us challenge in our inner world is usually based off coping mechanisms that we've unconsciously or consciously tried to put into place to just try and cope with life, with the challenges of life. And sometimes these coping mechanisms have negative byproducts, and we repeat them because they've worked at some stage, and we keep repeating them, and maybe they keep us safe or something like that. But there are problems that happen off the back of that. And I see depression or anxiety or even PTSD or CPTSD, I see them all as really normal responses to kind of not really normal things that have happened in our lives, and not having the supports to be able to process the emotions, to make sense of them, and to be able to take wisdom from them and grow from them and evolve from them properly. Instead, we can get kind of stuck in old ways of doing things.
What do you see? You made a really good point, which I'm fascinated by. What do you see as the upside and the downside of the diagnosis and the label of you are depressed, as opposed, so that identity piece as opposed to symptomatic?
Yeah. I mean, I think the upside is that people can feel like they finally can understand something that they haven't been able to understand for a long time. And because there's other people that are suffering with, living with a similar thing, there's maybe mainstream information they can access about what treatment methods have worked for certain things. We know certain psychopharmaceutical approaches and psychological approaches work better for certain things. So they might be able to lean into one of those kind of things. And if that works for them, great. And if it doesn't, then they might start moving outside of their diagnosis and outside of the standard treatment realm. So at least it gives a starting point. What is unhelpful about that is that when people want a diagnosis, or they believe through pop psychology or whatever they've researched, if they believe that they have a certain diagnosis, it's not unlikely that they won't be given that diagnosis, that they will be able to share the right information to be able to get that kind of thing. And it can be limiting, and it can stop them. And a lot of people, again, just going back to my point before, don't know the difference between the symptom of depression, which we will, I'm guessing, all feel our entire lives, and depression as a diagnosis. And the real simple differentiation is this is not in the DSM. This is just a simple way of looking at it, is that it's about functioning being impaired. So it's we can have symptoms of stress, anxiety, of things that happen after trauma, but it's to what degree do they impair our functioning? Do they stop us from meeting our basic needs? Do they stop us from basically working, being able to earn money, have stable housing, build and form relationships with other people? If they're impairing our functioning and stopping us from being able to actually create a life, that's when diagnoses could be considered. Before that, it's just a symptom, and that means that we probably don't have to go down that kind of road, but it's just an indicator that there's something here that might need some further introspection and support. Yeah.
I loved it. I was talking about this with a number of clients recently to kind of, I guess, almost expand on your point of the diagnosis and the identity can help you make sense of what's going on to a certain degree, and at times help you almost there's communities and there's other people that understand that, and there's healing that comes in that. And when you want to shift that identity, if you've held on to it for too long, it can be really challenging. If you, based on your learnings, both mainstream and alternative, I guess we still categorize those. If you had your way with, say, depression, how would you treat it, label it? What would you do with something as broad and big as depression?
Yeah, beautiful. Love being invited to share on this one. And because it's been my experience as well, and I've helped a lot of clients in this space too, let's not even worry about what the science says. To say, I personally don't believe that it is chemical in any way. I believe it's existential, which what I mean by existential is it's about the way that we see ourselves, others, and the world around us. And that's definitely my experience of it. And I believe that it can be treated from an existential perspective. And there also, with that being said, there are times where I have clients that I work with where we work really hard and really deeply on everything that's going on for them. And what I'm noticing is that their depression is getting in the way of us doing good work. And when that happens, I have a conversation with them about medication. And I'm not a psychiatrist nor a psychologist. So I have a conversation with them about it based on my work within the mental health realm. And I suggest they go talk to their GP about that. And in some cases, it's been extremely helpful, because what the psychopharmacology, it's actually created to be a Band-Aid that protects the wound to a level that allows us to do the work that's required underneath the wound to heal it. People forget that and because it relieves symptoms, and it relieves symptoms enough. So for depression, the symptoms are usually an inability to feel motivated to change their life. Now, that's a big hindrance to us doing good work. And we can't do the like existential stuff. We can't do the trauma stuff. We can't work on maybe what they learned about different things from their parents and growing up if they actually just don't have the motivation to do anything to move them forward. So I have had clients that have got medication. Once that started to kick in, we have done some incredible work that's really moved the needle for them. And then the plan is to, with the help of their GP, to slowly and properly come off that medication with support. I guess what I'm getting at is that sometimes the symptoms can be strong enough that they completely stop us from being able to do good work. And to get medication, we need at least an interim diagnosis. And so, we do have to go see doctors to get that. And it has been helpful in the past. Could I have helped these same clients without the medication, just with the approaches I bring? I believe I definitely could have. It would be a slower journey, and one where I'm just constantly taking them out of victimhood and hopelessness and building their hope up, which sometimes can take like quite a bit of the session, reminding them clearly of who they are and what they want. And, and then we can start doing a little bit of work, but it's just one foot on the accelerator, one foot on the brake, and we're not traveling that far. So it has been very helpful. And then of course, we'll couple that with exercise and eating well and all those things that they didn't even have the motivation to do without the medication. Now we've got someone who's motivated enough to like do yoga, to meditate, to exercise, and we're doing weekly work on all the stuff that's been super challenging in their world, where they hold on to guilt, they hold on to grief, they hold on to lots of stored emotion. Now we're starting to really take that foot off the brake and start to make some traction in their worlds.
That's one of the more measured responses I've ever heard to the two very different schools of thought. I like the way you blended that. We both love a good relationship. And your new book, you talk about trigger work in conscious relationships. Firstly, can you define trigger? I know a lot of people have been using it over the last couple of years, but can you define it? And then can you talk about what trigger work looks like in a relationship?
Yeah, beautiful. So a trigger is when the nervous system has a little jump, right? So it's chugging along at its normal pace. Let's just say it's 11 a.m. You've been up for a good part of the day and you've had some coffee, which of course has, raised that everything up a little bit. And things are going pretty smoothly in your day. Maybe there's a couple of different stresses that you've managed and there's been little fluctuations. But a trigger is where it kind of like jumps quite, at least to a tangible amount. And you notice physiologically and psychologically a few things. Physiologically, the heart will start thumping quite fast. You might, if you're aware of your blood pressure, I definitely am. I feel the blood pressure has increased. You might have hot flush in the face. You might get sweaty hands. You might get sweaty pits. And you might feel maybe like a bit, everyone feels a bit different, but this is essentially what I'm talking about is you feel a bit of the fight or flight response has just kicked in. That's exactly what's happened. Psychologically, you are probably unable to think clearly. You're feeling confused. You're feeling like pressured in the mind. Maybe the voice, the kind of volume's turned up quite loud. You're very focused on what's just happened maybe in front of you and maybe missing some other things outside of you. You might be feeling anxiety. You might be feeling stress. But so everyone kind of gets this, right? But it's when something happens that makes you feel where you notice that's happened to you. Now, it might just be a little tiny bit, or it might be so much that you feel like retreating or you feel like fighting or you feel like writing back an angry text message, or you feel like, blasting someone or beeping the horn or whatever, right? So it can beat it to varying amounts. That's what I believe a trigger is. And I believe that it is in every single situation, it is an indication that there is something from our past, not just something, many things from our past that are somewhat related to this trigger, or the subconscious, which is our danger detector system, basically perceives that there's some similarity in what's just happened in our world and other things that have been dangerous in our past. And those things that have been dangerous in our past haven't been effectively processed, made sense of, and the emotional residue hasn't been released. So when that thing happens again, it's any way similar, the body registers it as danger and the body goes into that fight or flight mechanism. What a trigger isn't, I know it wasn't part of the question, but like it's, people use it like, oh, this has triggered me or that's triggered me when they don't like maybe someone's point of view of something, or maybe they hold the opposite point of view, or maybe when somebody like behaves in a certain way. All of those actually can be triggers, but they're not always. A trigger is the spike in the nervous system. So it's like the body never lies. And if the body has that little jump, even if it's a tiny bit, and the more we do things like meditate and cultivate awareness, the more we notice that it's happened. Sometimes it happens without your knowledge, but 5 minutes later, you'll be like, I'm feeling so confused. I can't think clearly, and I'm feeling anxious and fluttery, and I feel like I need to go to the toilet, like, and release my bowel. Like maybe something just triggered me, and that's happened to me, and then you're like, let's just keep going with this. You're sitting on the toilet and you're like, what in the world just happened? Like, why did something that person said or did make me feel like this? Like, and there's this feeling like that's so silly. I feel so childish or stupid that thing they said, like, I know that it's not true or whatever. Like, so there's this logic part of you that's like, I shouldn't be triggered. And then there's this part of you that's very obvious. Your body has been triggered, and it doesn't lie. It always shows you that there is stuff there. And my whole book is a self-help book, and it basically teaches you how to effectively process the roots, and there's many roots, all the situations in your life that have collectively made your nervous system respond in a certain or particular way to what's just happened in front of you. What I believe is that when we process it all effectively, then it's no longer dangerous to us. So when someone cuts us off in traffic or says something rude or leaves us out or uses a particular word, maybe they say something about our weight or whatever it is they do or say, but when that happens, we might still not like it, and we'll still remember that in our past that was hurtful, but the nervous system won't flutter, it won't go up, and our mind will stay clear and balanced. And whilst we still might be like, I really prefer you not to use that language, or we might still choose to leave a situation, it's not triggering the nervous system anymore. And that's when we know that we've effectively processed something. And the last part I'll just leave here before I move on to the next question is, again, take everything I say with a grain of salt, but I believe that we attract or manifest situations in our lives that are similar to the things that have triggered us in the past. And I believe that we do that because we're here to evolve. So we're always being pulled into evolution. And if there's stuff from our past that we haven't faced properly, it'll just keep showing up again in our present. And it's like just tapping us on the shoulder. Hey, Blake, you ready to process that rejection piece yet, mate? Hey, Blake, are you ready to process that, that body image thing? Are you ready to process whatever that is? Because if you do process it, you will evolve. And we're all here to evolve without even going too spiritual, right? We're all here to just evolve and grow as humans, as souls. And our traumas kind of stop us from evolving. And I feel like there's this bigger thing that I really can't explain that's always pulling and pushing us to grow and evolve. And I've just hypothesized that maybe that's why triggers keep triggering us from the past, because what I've noticed is when we do the processing effectively, it's amazing. What happens in the coming months is that often that we'll attract a situation again exactly the same, but we'll notice that we act differently. And that's just like this solidifying that we've changed and grown. And we're just like, oh my God, so proud of myself that like Mum said that thing that was like, every time she says it, it just like makes me so angry. And this time I was like, Mum, I'd really prefer you not to say that thing. It doesn't, and I just like did it in such a balanced way. And I stayed so calm. And then I got a better response from Mum in that situation, right? So that's a bit about triggers, and I'll talk a bit about the conscious relationship thing, but I'm guessing is there anything there, any food for thought there? I think you want me to go a little bit further into.
Well, I think what you stated, which if everybody can grasp what you just said, becomes really valuable in that triggers aren't a problem. You shouldn't be avoiding them. And if you can see them in the positive light that they are, it becomes really beneficial. And I think social media, is a really good example of this. It's almost a cesspit at times of that person triggers me, so I'm going to delete them or block them or whatever it might be, when really, choose what you want to do after. But in that trigger, it might be one of the biggest opportunities for you. So I think it's our relationship to triggers that I really, kind of wanted to harp on about. And you spoke so nicely to that of like the value and the teacher of the trigger, as opposed to it shouldn't be this way, or I shouldn't feel that, and I should delete, block, ignore, distract from.
Yeah. I might share a quick client example, and try to de-identify it as much as possible, but it might be helpful here, right? I said to me the other day, they were very triggered by something that a family member said to them. It was actually a racist comment that a family member made. And they were saying to me, like, is this actually a trigger, or is it just like, racism? Like, we just don't tolerate it. Like, should I be triggered by someone being racist, making these kind of comments, etc.? And I said to them, if your nervous system is activated, there's something there for you. It's not about the collective thing about like racism is just not tolerated and we should feel angry, or we should feel like a sense of injustice when someone else does it. And that should motivate us to say something about it. There's something there for you. When we dived into it deeply, there was in fact so much there. It wasn't about racism specifically. It was about so much more. It was about essentially someone like pushing their way into her kind of like energy, imposing beliefs and ways of seeing the world without any kind of awareness or permission, and kind of like perpetuating like a dogma narrative. And really like, but it was mostly about really like not respecting this person's space, boundaries, and, wishes to have their own ways of seeing the world, etc. Right? So in fact, there was something very personal there for her around that. It wasn't the racism at all, but we had to get underneath it, and we had to look at all the times the same kind of paradigm had played out. And then we realized this is actually what it was. And we got to heal it. And it meant that moving forward, she's still not going to enjoy racism, but she can stay more balanced and then choose a better way of responding, which will get a better outcome. Because one thing I believe is anytime that there is emotion in motion, anytime there's any kind of strong emotion in motion, communicating, it doesn't matter what we say, our energy it will come through with that emotion. We won't get a good outcome with the other person. So if we can, and this is a great segue into conscious relationships. Basically, my suggestion is that when someone says or does something that triggers us, if we can, we ask for space. We take full responsibility, not you've triggered me, but something that has been said has brought up something for me based on my past, based on my trauma, based on my stuff, my family, my way of seeing the world. Can I just come back to you? I need to go and find out what there is here for me right now. Can I just go take a little time in silence to do this? It's not about you. I'm not saying you did anything bad or wrong in what you said. I just need to see what this is for me so I can come back and continue this conversation in an objective, balanced way.
That's brilliant.
That's what it's about. That's what it's about. And, people don't get triggered in isolation. They don't get triggered by things they read in books. They don't get triggered. They get triggered by other humans, whether that be on social media, on the phone, via text or in other ways, because we're always kind of reflecting and projecting upon each other. When we hold something in a lot of value, so we attach pride to it, maybe that is a particular religious way of seeing the world. Maybe it's the anti-vax thing, right? Or maybe it's the vax thing. But if we hold a lot of pride about it, we're obsessed with this being right, righteous. The opposite of that is bad, right? And someone that portrays that way of being can sometimes trigger us because we're holding on to so much that we are good, they are bad, for example. But this kind of thing happens in lots of more simple ways in relationships and conscious relationships. I'm talking romantic, but I mean, if you can have a conscious relationship with your boss or your buddy or other people in the world, then you can use this kind of work with them. The really hard thing is that how do we do trigger work when we're not in conscious relationships? And the real answer is you can only change you. And if you go, and even if they're not going to get it at all, if you go do the trigger work and you go process your stuff that makes you go into fight or flight every time that happens, and you can come back and you can still not like what they say or do, but you can stay balanced, you're going to put out a different energy, even if you don't say a word. And if you do say a word, you're still going to be putting out different energy. And you're basically there's not going to be as much fire. And sometimes, I don't know how, but the other person just changes. They just change because you've changed. All you can do is go first. You can be a leader and you can just walk the walk. And that's all you can do to change another person if they're not willing to be conscious in their relationship with you.
I think one of the things you said there, people that are potentially quite well evolved in this space will understand what you're saying. If someone's new to what you're saying, they might potentially find themselves almost going into a numbing dissociation or even a passive aggressive of oh, I've calmed down, when you haven't really. You've just kind of suppressed it. So how does someone get to a place, I guess, of neutrality? What do you suggest in that time frame? And I really like what you said there, having studied with the Gottman Institute around relationships. They're big on when you're flooded, to have the conversation, minimum 30 minutes, come back later. But how does someone know that they're not just pushing it down, but they're actually kind of moving through it?
That's it. And this is actually the reason why I wrote this book, is because people know this, but no one's given a method of how to do it. And a lot of therapists do it in their work with clients, but no one's articulated how do you do it on your own and how do you actually effectively process trauma and triggers. No one really talks about this. I'm not really quite sure why. One of my favorite books is Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins. I don't know if you've read it, but he talks about letting go and the mechanism of letting go. And he talks about suppression and repression, but he not once actually says, how do you let go? He just talks about letting go the whole book. I was like, okay, I love this book, but someone needs to explain the how you actually let go. And for me, I didn't learn this at uni, and I didn't learn this through any of my additional training, but I actually learned this through my clients. I learned this through the hours spent with human beings, and I learned this through holding space while they cried. Because what I noticed was that when I created the right environment for them, and that is external environment, but they also had to have the right environment inside, right? So the first chapter of my book is all about this environment, right? And if this environment is not correct, if you cannot, sometimes there's like beliefs and assumptions and worldview and existential shit that takes ages to even get this environment right. Other clients, they turn up on a free mini session that I do, and they already have most of the pieces, and I help them a little bit over the line, and they just break down right then and there. And they were like, what the hell was that? Like, you just did like nearly nothing, and I just cried like a baby, and I feel so amazing right now. How did you do that? Right. And it's like, it was just that I have started to intellectualize what is required to create an environment for us to be able to effectively process and let go of our emotions. And what I've noticed is it's normal, like there's a inside of us, it's normal and natural to, like, it's already there. I'm not doing anything except creating the right environment that goes with an innate urge to actually release our emotions. But the environment needs to be right. That means that they need to feel safe. They need to feel supported. They need to feel their nervous system needs to be safe. Now, this is the missing piece. Like, there's two missing pieces. One is the nervous system, and the other one is some people have beliefs and conditioning that if they feel their emotions, something will happen. Either they'll end up in really bad mental health and become suicidal, or like in complete chaos and their whole world will crumble, or they'll be shamed, guilted, or ridiculed because that's what they learned when they were growing up. But there's something bad will happen if I feel my emotions properly, okay? It's not safe for me to do so. If someone has that, I can spend sessions on just that before we get anywhere near releasing. Before we even get to step one, we're doing all that work, right? And that's really what I'm really good at is that, because it is trauma that creates all those assumptions, agreements, beliefs, programs, ways of doing things that are in a bid for safety but are really affecting people. Where was I at? Environment. Once the environment is safe, and I didn't talk about the other piece, which is the nervous system piece. I did a training in something called Psych K, but if you look at other alternative approaches like EFT tapping, if you look at EMDR, so these approaches. When I was at uni kind of 12 years ago now, they weren't teaching any of these modalities. They weren't scientifically rigorous enough. And I did a science-based degree in counseling and coaching and applied social sciences. They wouldn't let us even talk about these approaches because they weren't rigorous. But these days, like in the last 5 years, there's been so much good evidence around these approaches that used to be seen as alternate approaches, that they now are accepted as in the uni syllabus, which is amazing. And I've done training through the uni on this stuff now. It's such a funny place how 12 years changes things. But in all of these approaches, they do different things that create a sense of a nervous system safety. And they all use an element of touch with the body. So if EFT tapping, they're tapping on meridian points. In EMDR, they can tap left and right on the knee, on the knees, or they can trace with their eyes left and right. In Psych K, we use something called the whole brain posture that comes from something before that, from something called brain gym. And it's really just a crossing of the limbs in this particular way. There's a few different ways that we can cross them. And when they looked on brain scans at what happens when you tap or cross limbs, they noticed that both left and right hemisphere talk to each other. The nervous system started down-regulating. We started going back into rest and digest. Everything started slowing down. So they still don't really know how these things work, but apparently it doesn't matter if we don't know how things work. As long as they work and there's evidence that they work, they can be scientifically rigorous. And what these different things do is they help the nervous system to create enough calm and safety when it kind of gets flooded. But it's not about just creating the safety to calm down after we're triggered. That's not going to solve the problem, right? And there's a lot of even the stuff with like breath work, ice, very calming for the nervous system, breath work and ice baths and meditation and exercise. And there's all very, very important things. But when they're used just to alleviate the symptoms of a nervous system that's become triggered, better than doing nothing at all. Absolutely. But it's only the tip of the iceberg, because once we can create more regulation in our body and our mind, and we can create a whole brain state, we can actually go back to earlier experiences in our life. So this is the next part of the process, right? It's going back to earlier times in our life where a similar event has happened. We all have kind of wounding that seems like it's played out lots of different times. For me, it's a lot of stuff about like how intelligent I was. And it all stemmed from a lot of little traumas at school. A really good example is in a math class, I was asked to stand up and recite the times tables every single day for a year. And at the beginning, when I knew the answers to maybe my 1 and 2s, I felt good about it. And then when I started not knowing the answers, I started feeling embarrassed and shameful of that. And then that trigger was perpetuated. And as it got closer to my turn, my nervous system started doing its thing. And my teacher kept making us do that every day for a year. Now, that's just one thing in my timeline. There's also like other things that happened in my life that are all about the same kind of paradigm. And a few years ago in a Psych K training, I saw this whole paradigm clearly. I did processing around every single experience in my life where I was triggered about my like intelligence and being smart enough. And I noticed that there was like a loop, because when I was triggered in that, then my brain actually wasn't working properly. So I didn't know the answer. It was this horrible cycle. I saw it clearly. I went through my whole life and I actually like went through all the big and painful experiences. When I went there in my mind, if it triggered my nervous system, that was an indication that there was still something there. If I went there in my mind, but I stayed calm, that was processed. I just had processed it. Maybe I talked to a friend, or I had support, or for some reason I could cope with it. But anytime I went there in my mind and the heart flickered, that means it wasn't processed properly. And every single one of those through my whole life that I could remember, I used this process on until I had effectively done every single thing that I can remember from my life. And I call that a timeline cleanup. And that's exactly what we do. That's what my book teaches. It teaches you how to do that on your own, to do a timeline cleanup of any particular paradigms or patterns. And when that happened, when I did that, everything changed in my world after that. I started learning better when I was in training. I started retaining more information. I started not going into those flooded states, like less and less and less. I remember doing like a dance class and noticing that like I would actually, like the dance class would get stressful for me and it would start to happen, but it wouldn't happen anywhere as near as much as it used to. And as I kept going and kept processing and kept feeling that and it just like got less and less and less and less. Long-winded answer, but hope that hits the nail on the head there.
Mate, I'll go. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, that's not the entire process. I kind of put the process into 10 steps. I try to keep it really simple. There's some intention, there's some energy clearing, there's some stuff, there's some like action to take after you've done the trigger work. It's like, what are you going to do in your life to integrate it? Like I bring that kind of coach hat to the process, but simply I've just like articulated a bit about how this process works. And it's exactly what I use with clients. It just took me a few years to actually write it into a self-help style book.
Mate, it's brilliant. And amongst all of this, for those listening, I think what stands out is potentially for some people seeing triggers in a very different light to the way that they might see them now. And also seeing the freedom that is on the other side of you moving through those and what's available to you in terms of executing on your life, your goals, kind of living in a more regulated state. So, mate, that is absolutely brilliant. If people want to get hold of the book, find out about you, where's the best spot?
At the moment, it's probably Instagram. That's definitely Instagram at the moment. So that book is available via my link in bio. It's a really short read. It's 70 pages. It is only available in ebook at the minute, record audio at some stage in the near future. First 4 chapters are free. Full book's $10, so it's a steal. And with the full book, you will get a cheat sheet, which will help you with the steps. You'll get an audio recording that you can actually press, like you can do the first step, then just pause and then press play again and move on to the next one. So it kind of like helps you through it. And yeah, that is the best place to get it. And, I'm always creating content and trying to explain this and other concepts in really clear ways all through my Instagram. So that's the best place to find me at the minute. And that is, my handle is I am the mindful coach, which is a really, really old one. It comes back from this thing, acceptance and commitment therapy and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is one of my first modalities. It's where I kind of came up with this name, and it kind of just stuck with it ever since, even though so much has grown on top of that.
Jakob Casella, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Blake.